Humanity possesses the most advanced analytical hardware in the animal kingdom. Yet, clinical observations reveal a persistent paradox. Our highest cognitive functions remain functionally dependent and often constrained by the brain's most primitive survival circuits. To understand how human intelligence actually operates, we have to look at the brain through the lens of a systemic debate. We need to identify exactly which neural networks dictate control over the machine. One theoretical stance, the cognitivist view, argues that human supremacy is defined strictly by the neocortex. This is the outer layer responsible for complex language, logic, and sequential planning. The counterstance, the behavioralist view, posits that the cortex is merely a data processor. In this model, high-level analysis is secondary to the limbic system, the deep structures that generate our motivational drives. Resolving this debate requires deconstructing the power struggle between these systems to see which network truly governs human consciousness. The battleground maps to two anatomical territories, the outer analytical neocortex and the deep subcortical limbic structures. The behavioralist argument starts at the base. The cortex is functionally useless without continuous excitatory signals transmitted from the brainstem's reticular excitatory area. This brainstem region houses specific neurohormonal systems. Neurons here synthesize and release acetylcholine, norepinephrine, and serotonin. These neurohormones project upward, providing the exact background excitatory tone required to maintain wakefulness. Before the cortex can process a single complex thought or plan a movement, this primitive brainstem structure must literally turn the entire system on. The cognitivist side argues that higher intellect is structurally language-based and maps tightly to highly specific cortical regions. For years, the prefrontal cortex was assumed to be the absolute locus of human intelligence, largely because of its sheer prominence in humans compared to other primates. Clinical data from prefrontal lobotomies disproved this. When the neural connections to the prefrontal areas are severed, patients lose the ability to string together sequential tasks or suppress inappropriate behavior. However, they retain their basic language comprehension, memory, and motor functions. Compare that to damage in Wernicke's area, located in the posterior superior temporal lobe of the dominant hemisphere. Widespread destruction of Wernicke's area results in global aphasia. A patient might hear perfectly well or read words on a page, but they completely lose the ability to interpret the thought or process the sensory experience into a logical framework. This occurs because human intellect relies on converting sensory experiences into their language equivalents before the brain can permanently store or analyze them. The prefrontal cortex functions as a working memory, managing temporary data to execute plans. But without the language framework provided by Wernicke's area, global comprehension and intellect collapse. The behavioralist counters by examining memory. Cortical intellect is functionally blind and amnesic unless the limbic system decides what information is worth retaining. The brain is constantly inundated with sensory data. To avoid exceeding its capacity, the system must ignore over 99% of all incoming signals. This data filtering is achieved at the cellular level through habituation. When an insignificant stimulus repeats, calcium channels at the sensory terminal progressively close, terminating the transmission of the signal. This contrasts with sensitization or facilitation. If a stimulus is linked to pain or pleasure, it triggers a biochemical survival cascade to ensure the event is remembered. During facilitation, serotonin activates cyclic AMP inside the terminal. This internal reaction locks potassium channels closed, resulting in a prolonged action potential that opens a floodgate of calcium ions, physically strengthening the memory trace. The macro-level governor controlling this synaptic reinforcement is a medial temporal lobe structure called the hippocampus. Bilateral removal of the hippocampi causes profound anterograde amnesia. The patient retains old memories, but becomes entirely unable to form new declarative or symbolic memories lasting longer than a few minutes. Because the hippocampus evaluates stimuli based on reward or punishment, the emotional limbic system dictates exactly what the intellectual cortex is allowed to learn. When we look at behavioral execution, real-time action becomes a direct negotiation between cortical planning and raw limbic urges. The prefrontal association area serves as the architect of complex movement, planning patterns and actively suppressing our primitive behavioral drives. But the hypothalamus sits at the center of the limbic system. Despite its tiny volume, it operates as the central control headquarters for all vegetative functions and emotional drives. Stimulation in the lateral hypothalamus generates extreme hunger and active rage. Conversely, stimulating the ventromedial nuclei triggers satiety, tranquility, and placidity. Working alongside the hypothalamus is the amygdala, operating as the behavioral awareness window. It projects contextual status and emotional weight into the rest of the limbic system. Bilateral destruction of the amygdala results in Kluver-Bucy syndrome. The animal loses all threat recognition, displaying extreme, fearless curiosity about visually dangerous objects. Without limbic contextual evaluation assigning fear, reward, or punishment, the highly intelligent neocortex investigates the world blindly and inappropriately. The limbic system operates as the ultimate behavioral referee. Ultimately, the brain does not operate as competing cortical and limbic factions. It functions as an intricately integrated thalamocortical limbic unit. Bottom up, the reticular formation wakes the system. Sensory data enters Wernicke's area, translating into coherent thought. The prefrontal cortex engineers this into a sequential plan. Finally, the hippocampus and amygdala tag the plan with reward or punishment, providing the drive to execute it. The prefrontal cortex can formulate a brilliant 10-step plan, but without the motivational drive of the limbic reward centers, the plan will not be executed. Our cortical intelligence dictates how we analyze the world, but our limbic system dictates what we learn from it and why we decide to act.